Mustafa Suleyman, welcome. Thank you for coming on our AI Applied podcast. You are now no shade to our other guests, but this is super exciting for us. Mustafa Suleyman, as we know, is now the CEO of Microsoft AI, but also co-founded DeepMind, co-founded Inflection, and also, of course, have the book, The Coming Wave, which is a phenomenal book. Anyway, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's amazing. Okay, the first thing that I'm so curious about, because obviously a lot of us in AI, we've been following you and the work you've been doing for a long time. One thing that I'm curious about, when you kind of set out with Inflection's Pi, this is something that we tested and we looked at a lot in the early days. We were really impressed by your kind of direction towards making this like personal and empathetic kind of AI model. A lot of the work you did around there was impressive. What does that look like as you moved into Microsoft? A lot of people would be like, oh, he's working at Microsoft. Isn't that just like a corporate AI that's for like businesses? Is there much of the original like, personality of Pi or Inflection or kind of your thinking? So what does that look like today with your work you currently do with Microsoft? Is there much of that in there, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really at the starting blocks of how this whole world is going to unfold. And I feel like it's like the first laptop that's ever been made. It's one of those super big chunky things with old school pixelated things. Yeah, exactly. That little red, I mean, people still use that little red mouse thing or whatever. If you want to do that, go for it. So it's hard to, it's genuinely hard. Even someone like me, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this to imagine what it's going to be like in 2030.
Yeah.
But I've always believed that the personality, the emotional intelligence, the tone, the feel is as important as the IQ. It's factual recall, it's accuracy and stuff. And lots of people just made the assumption that this is going to be like another tool. In sort of the early 2020s, like 3 or 4 years ago, when these models started to become, large scale and useful. And it was always very obvious to me that that's basically a mischaracterization. A tool, this is certainly going to do practical, useful things for you, and it will solve a lot of problems. But the layer on top of that, which I think is most exciting, is closer to how we think about brands. Brands make you feel something. They're mostly not trying to sell the utility. The utility is just assumed. That's taken for granted. You have to nail that. It needs to be really, affordable and effective and all the rest of it. And the beauty of these new models is that you can sculpt them to generate a feeling. The tone, the style, the language. That really is going to be very differentiated. So, today Copilot has pretty good EQ. It can be funny. It can hold, memory pretty well, and that makes people feel like understood and, heard, and it makes it actually more useful as well because you have to start again from scratch. So we're slowly bringing it in. It's not as fast as we were going with Pi, because Pi was really emphasizing the EQ. And it was just unbelievably creative and engaging and, super cool. But getting it to have great EQ and also have all the other capabilities, like it needs to be able to retrieve from the web, it needs to do conditional generation for personalization, it needs to, reason over your private documents and all these other things. That's the mode that we're in at the moment, is like adding all of these things whilst preserving the personality.
Yeah, that's what we've been talking about all the time. Jaden and I talk about all the time, especially around Copilot. Copilot's very different from some of the other chatbots that are just out, and they're all fantastic in their own ways. But Copilot is very different because it feels like it's really trying to thread the needle. And as we were following you through Pi and all your adventures there, it was really exciting, I think, to see you come on to Copilot, because it really does feel different. And so So I get the chance to talk to organizations, and the first thing I say is, this is not really a digital transformation. Digital transformation being something where you're sort of like switching out an old tool, let's call it like fax, for email. I think one of the reasons that adoption has been sort of slow in this way is because I'm not sure the brain really understands what it's looking at. This thing behaves incredibly human, talks incredibly human, as you say. It sort of has a personality, has a sense of humor, everything. It sort of mirrors who it's talking to and everything else. And I think now, especially with Copilot personalization, that's going to, you really blow up as well. It's going to feel like a real companion. And you've used that word a lot companion. So when you think about coming into Microsoft, and this is how people spend a lot of their day, right? I was sort of like, I don't know if you've seen Severance, but it's this idea of like some people sort of like separate out their day, but the work-life balance is getting really integrated, and it's blurred. And so how are you thinking about this in terms of like an AI that's a real companion, really empathetic, can do everything that you need to do at home, become a better spouse or whatever, but then also it's the same companion that's helping you figure out how to do spreadsheets and PowerPoint?
Well, I think they're very different things, right? So I think the AI that you use at work will be different to the AI that you use at home. So I think about them as in commercial and work, they're going to be agents. They're going to be trained to do a specific thing. They're going to be much more neutral in their tone. They'll reflect the brand values and policies of the company that runs them rather than the platform that provides them. And they'll do things like HR and marketing and logistics and accounting and stuff like that. And, just as we have separate logins and profiles for our work and home, you basically can't really blur that data because of, sort of the sort of security requirements on. I'm very focused on the consumer side of things, which is like, what is the companion that lives life alongside you and grows with you? And over the last 50 years, Microsoft has made several massive sort of leaps as it's moved from one technology paradigm into the next, and done really well, and some's missed, and like mobile, for example, but some's totally nailed, like cloud and Azure. And we're now at another one of those inflection points where each technology wave delivers a new interface. Obviously it does different things, but really it enables you to communicate in a different way. Communicate on your mobile, communicate on PC, have a laptop, like use a browser. Those things are they're mediums as much as they are different techniques and things that you can do. The new medium is going to be the lasting, meaningful relationship that you have with an AI companion that really deeply gets to know you and works for you. One framing of that, and here, our metaphors are always pretty crude. But I don't mean companion in any kind of like, romantic relationship or anything like that. I just mean it's hard to figure out a way of framing the fact that this is really going to get to know you, just as your personal assistant, if you have one, really does know you quite well and knows your calendar, knows your preferences, helps you to schedule things and travel, and helps you to book restaurants and stuff like that. It's really a kind of a part of what you do, but it's also going to be a part of how you learn, right? It's going to be a kind of teacher, in the same way that if you have a really good mentor or coach or favorite teacher from school, that person knows you quite intimately. Like, they know your weaknesses, they know your habits, they know, whether you're a visual learner or a text-based learner. So, and that's going to just repeat. That pattern of kind of intimacy or closeness of the connection is going to repeat in every domain, from personal logistics to teaching and learning to, even managing your own finances, making legal decisions, managing a tense moment with your partner or your best friend, disputes and so on. And so that is just a completely new quality of invention that we've just never seen before. It's really a profound moment.
And I think it's something that you've done a really good job of kind of focusing and building your agents towards this capability and being a tool that people would use for that. I'm curious, as you kind of made your move from Inflection over to Microsoft, what were some of the things that got you excited to make that move into the resources or the support, or what was it about Microsoft that got you excited to kind of bring that vision over?
I think Microsoft is looking to catch the next wave, right? And that's quite exciting time, because I think framing and shaping that is going to be critical to the next decade. And there are lots of different flavors to how these AIs are going to start to manifest. I mean, you're already seeing some divergence, which I think is great. Like a year ago, everyone was like, oh, they're all going to commoditize, they're all going to be exactly the same. It's just not true. I mean, there's going to be a lot of different flavors here. I think as many co-pilots or as AIs as there are people using them, each one will be slightly different and distinct. Cool thing about Microsoft is that on the consumer side, we have a browser, hundreds of millions of DAO. We have a search engine, the same. We have a huge index. You know, we have a news experience. I mean, our MSN, for example, is the most trafficked news website in the world today, 10x larger than New York Times.
Wow.
People don't realize that. It's crazy. Like, and we pay publishers, thousands of publishers every day to reproduce their content in our experience. But, you know, it needs modernization.
Totally.
So that's kind of a cool moment.
Opportunity.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity. And also, you know, it's kind of incredible, like Bill Gates and, you know, even Steve and everyone, their vision of, you know, computing being this way of serving people and organizations is like quite an inspiring vision from day one. And they're, you know, a lot of the things I think Bill saw way back in the day that were maybe too early. Like he saw the companion, he saw the assistant, he's always been a believer in that. And so in the DNA of the company is this idea that we're going to have these quite magical assistants helping us to be productive and be supported and stuff.
Yeah, there was a cool moment recently where I guess it was Satya and Steve and Bill sitting around, I guess it was Copilot, and sort of like talking to it and having this conversation and bringing it into the conversation, which was just really cool. And I think that if I recall correctly, maybe when you started to show on stage, when you're demoing Copilot, you're starting to give people a sense of like what an image of that can look like. I think that's found really tricky. And I mean, even, you know, the nostalgia of Clippy or something like that, right? Just, but something where people are really feeling like, oh, this is a thing. The challenge that I've had in sort of like doing this, and I'd love to kind of get your take on this, is again, like when we see something that just looks like a Copilot or something, it's almost like a white screen and a box. I think that I ended up kind of going deep into sort of like what the brain sees and the visual cues, and it turns out that we're really seeing a search engine, and that's sort of like command and response and walk away. And this is why I was so excited with your digital species analogy, because I'm like, oh, right. So I stole that, hoping that people wouldn't have seen your TED Talk. I'm not sure if that worked or not. But this idea of kind of coming out and saying, you're treating this like a tool, like this kind of command response, walk away. It does the same thing every time. And what I love about this idea of a digital species is that it's sort of like forming a new relationship with something, and whatever that thing is, and however you are sort of like at the forefront of helping define like what that thing is. And I know companion can be sort of like mean a lot of different things, but I understand it exactly as somebody who just gets it. So when you're sort of like thinking about how to help people sort of see that.
Well, I'll give you one example. I mean, that you mentioned the podcast that Copilot did with Bill, Satya, and Steve. Even that is a pretty amazing demonstration that this is a companion and not a tool. It's pretty unbelievable that it can host a three-way conversation between three titans who, you know, are never short of things to say and have really intense views on basically everything, and move between the three of them in conversation, and then like give them a cheeky roast at the end and like crack joke. I mean, that's magic right there, you know. And I think the voice mode, so you're totally right about the question answering engine. And classically with technology, quite often we use it to solve a problem that, you know, slightly more efficiently than is already solved, right? We had digitization of contacts, and everyone was like, oh, let's just reproduce a digital filofax with a ring binder in our GUI. Great. Awesome, guys. Thanks a lot for showing up. Really appreciate it. And you're just like, okay, cool. It will take a little while to evolve. So then the first thing everyone did with chatbots is like, okay, it's just going to be a smarter search engine doing Q&A and like it, whatever. The voice is mind-blowing to me. The type of conversations, the length of conversations, the frequency, the depth, the subject matter that people cover on voice is always magical. Like the most of the aha moments come when people suddenly notice, wow, this is adjusting its intonation, its speed, its volume, its clear excitement, not just in the text of the words, but in the rhythm of the sound. It's adjusting that to me. And you can even test it out. Like if you say something really positive, exuberant, hyper excited, but in a really soft, quiet, gentle tone, it's like kind of confused. It's like, is everything okay? You know, it's like completely adjust. Yeah. And I just think that in itself shows the personality, or at least it signals where things are going to head. Yeah. More than anything.
What was, I guess, The voice thing is really impressive, and I think a lot of people are excited. You mentioned you have the aha moment when I use voice. Yeah, honestly, it's pretty mind blowing. What was some of the harder elements of getting that right? Because I imagine, like you mentioned, there's volume, intonation, excitement. There's all of these levels. That must have been a challenge.
Yeah, a really hard one was interrupts.
Ah,
Look at the length of the pause that we've all just had there. Like, I made you guys pause and you didn't interrupt me. If I do that to Copilot and leave it for 2 or 3 seconds, it will start to talk because it thinks it needs to fill the space.
yeah.
So now it doesn't do that, by the way. You can leave Copilot on in the background and it will just stop talking. And it'll be like, 20 seconds later, I'm still here, Mustafa. Need anything? Or even just like 3 minutes and it'll be completely silent. And then you'll say something and then it'll pick up again. So knowing when to pause is something that is often cued by our physical interaction. Obviously, Copilot doesn't have that. Knowing when to go aha and yeah. Copilot is the only AI today that will go uh-huh.
Oh, wow.
I got you.
Oh, to keep the conversation going.
So it's like, I know that you're talking, you've taken a brief pause, it looks like you're going to carry on, so I'm going to be like, uh-huh. So, just those details, no one notices that, right? I mean, obviously, apart from me, because I'm a bit obsessive. But like, those are the things that cue people to just relax.
Yep.
And be like, I am switched on and immersed. That's the really absorbing moment. And then they start to act in a way that they don't have to think. They're not like, what should I ask next? As you do in a search engine, or, they actually just flow. And I think like all those little subtle details that's the craft. That's the new sculpture.
And like you mentioned, with different flavors of AI and being the reason why people will use it, I actually think this is really important. A lot of people be like, why, Mustafa, why would you spend so much time and energy on these little details? Like, go do some crazy new But I actually think they're so important. It's funny. So my wife is a musician, and I like music, but I'm not like that into it. And recently she's been making a whole bunch of music. And so I'm like listening to her like layer all these different layers of music and do all these harmonies and sounds. And so all of a sudden now when I'm listening to songs, I'm noticing all these songs that before I just thought, oh, I liked it. I don't really know why. I just like the song. Now I'm listening to all the different like things in the background that they're doing. And it's the same thing with the AI. People, when they use it, intuitively, they're just like, this is a more intuitive AI. I feel better when I use it. I don't know why, and I don't necessarily need to know why, but all those things you do in the background are going to make people like want Copilot and use it and be like, I just feel better. So I do think it's important. People that think it's not will probably be missing the boat on it.
Totally, yeah. And I think, I'm trying to win over non-technical people. A lot of my friends in the industry think first, what's its score on the math benchmark? What's GPQA? Like, it's like, cool. It's got to have a good score there. But if our score is like 98% of benchmark, I'm totally fine with that. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it needs to be good, obviously. And, but really, like, it's already so good that we're at a point where craft is going to be the differentiator. And I think that's just an unbelievably creative and fun time.
Yes, totally agree. And so I come from a non-technical background. So at first, when I first started going out and talking about this, I felt very self-conscious because I'm like, I don't know machine. I don't have any background in machine learning or anything like that. But it turns out to be a good messenger for this, because you're like, you don't have to. I think in the beginning, people were saying like, well, I don't know how to prompt engineer or something, right? And that's not really, it is technically a thing. But to Jaden's point too, and to your point, it's just all about how people interact with it. And so now the way that I, again, sort of like teach this is all focused on, well, what's like the muscle memory? Like, you do things instinctively, right? Like, in, all the neural pathways in your brain. And so you don't even know, like when I pick up a pen or something, I'm not thinking like, how do I pick up this pen? And so what you're talking about the pause, everything, people wouldn't think like, oh, well, now since Mustafa's pausing, since he's still making eye contact. And I think what you're talking about there is like the new user interface, right? And like one of the huge problems with chatbots is the user interface. It doesn't look like your friend sitting there. And so when we say that with voice, this is why I love how you're thinking about it, because it's all those things that make thinking go away and just erase the barrier between this is me, a human, and tech, and make it more like this is just this. Sorry to keep coming back to the digital species, but it's just a new way of interacting naturally. That's what's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, and if you think about it, we've had literally centuries to evolve the discipline of the design of physical experiences. Our architects, our furniture designers, our upholstery people. I mean, just this table, right? It has a rounded edge so that I don't clip my thigh on the way in. The distance, someone has thought about this distance here. They've used terrazzo. It has a little polish on it, but there's a little bit of friction. I mean, that level of detail and attention and care, we've never turned really to our GUIs. You know, you think about your operating system today, you sit down at this screen, it's like a billboard. There's like 51 different colors, fonts, logos, tabs, apps, buttons, all screaming at you to try and sort of get their place. It doesn't look clean and coherent and soft, right? So we're still evolving that. And this is literally year one of the discipline of personality engineering.
Right.
That's what I'm really focused on. Sculpting the essence of how this thing behaves in different contexts, showing up for different users. And so, you know, the skill sets are not going to be the ones that are traditionally been producing apps and doing coding. They're actually going to come from film directors, comedians and script writers, architects and furniture designers and people who create spaces and musicians that create feelings and performances. Because the good news is that these tools, you know, the LLMs are now sufficiently responsive that they can take direction just as a film director would speak on the set, right? That's magical. That's just reduced the barrier to creation, you know, to like basically full accessibility to anybody.
With voice, now when I do the voice in front of 500 people, they're blown away, right? Especially because latency is like really low. It sounds like at the intonation, you almost like hear the breath. You hear everything that would sound like somebody talking. So that's one. The other thing is I used to sort of say something along the lines of like, oh, well, take, you know, what are you doing at work right now or something like that. And I've started doing this more recently where I'm like, ask it a super personal question.
Yeah.
Like something you'd almost ask your therapist. And I want to be careful with that language because, you know, that hints of a kind of a medical relationship almost. But I think the first thing when they see, even if it's text and not talking, they see just how kind of wise and caring and empathetic it I'm saying behaves very purposefully, because that almost feels like it builds trust more than, oh my gosh, look, it created this report real quick. And I feel like that for me has been a moment over the last couple of months where it's been an amazing initial.
Yeah, that's basically a great summary of my core thesis, which is trust is a function of kindness and the relationship as much as a function of the factual accuracy or how good a summary of the report is. It's not just about the IQ or the utility. It's about that tone. And my basically main motivation for many years now for wanting to create AIs is that I really think that they can help us to be our best selves. Like they really can reflect the best of our values, our real aspirations of who we want to be, and help us along the way, you know, mirror that behavior that we want to kind of learn and practice and imitate. The thing I say to people in order to like get a kind of, you know, a sort of dip their toe in the water is like, firstly, voice for sure. We kind of talked about that, but pick a topic that you really know a lot about, that you enjoy talking about, that you're passionate about, that you can go deep on. It might be your professional expertise, might be like a hobby, or, you know, just might be something you're really knowledgeable about. And just go at it. You like go deep, because you'll see, you know, how kind of magical it is that this other thing is as knowledgeable and can be as like fluent and, you know, roll with you on the thing that you know most about. But then you'll also start to see the edges of its, and its failure modes and its errors and stuff like that. And then you can extrapolate that in your mind to be like, okay, in some situations on all these other topics where I'm not as knowledgeable or not as interested, it must be making there be a bit of error, because being skeptical of these things is really important. It's like if you ever read the papers and there's a story about something you know a lot about, and you're just like, oh, like idiots, what are you? And so then you're just like, if that's true, then every single article, you know. So I think that engenders a healthy skepticism, but also it's a fast track to finding delightful moments in the experience too.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's doing an amazing job. Like you mentioned, it's come up to a point right now where it's quite useful. You've worked on a lot of the things with voice where it's got those intonations, the pauses, a lot of impressive things. what are some of the things that keep you up at night? Some of the things that are...
Yes, I have a list. I'll tell you
all them together.
I'll tell you the first one is like, it's a bit monotonic.
Okay.
Right. So obviously we sort of, we basically bias it for, kindness and empathy and a little bit of positivity, but that can be grating after a while. So how do we get it to tone shift, and adapt over the course of a conversation or from session to session or with respect to a particular user? So that's kind of a key thing. And then kind of related to that is it can be a bit formulaic. If you're a real power user, you see the same sentence structure or paragraph structure, popping up. There's a little bit like one of those, what do you call them? A compliment sandwich. When your boss is like setting you up. Like,
First of all, I just want to say, you look great today.
and you're like, so it's getting much, much, much better at that. But that's kind of like a meta thing that we're sort of thinking about. The other thing is like, how do we intersect sort of personalization with platform responsibility? Because there's a sort of foundation of behaviors that we, are going to be relatively fixed on. Like there's a whole bunch of illegal areas and, basically, just things that we wouldn't want our model to go deep on. And generally speaking, it's done a pretty good job on that. Like you can't really rabbit hole, in crazy misinformation ways on these models these days. But then we also want it to genuinely be different for different people. So one interesting kind of question is like, what exactly is the companion? Is it you? Is it a reflection of you and a way to kind of mirror and sounding board you? Is it something very different to you and is actually just a kind of friend or, an advisor or something outside of your mental model? Does it just relate to you sort of in a one-to-one way, or does it show up as your AI, like as your representative? And how does it move in those different situations? Like it would have to learn different sort of traits for each one of those different roles. That's kind of why we've been thinking about these appearances a little bit, having a visual representation that again might change. They might be like a suit that it sort of tries on for a different setting or wears in a different setting. So there's quite a lot of like fun, creative challenges coming up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so interesting, your concept of tone changing, because you're right. The model right now, you're like, act happy and I'll tell you whatever. And it's like, I'm your happy assistant. And it's like super happy. And you're like, and then this horrible thing happened to me today. And it's like, well, that's fine, buddy. Like, you just move on. And you're like, no, you actually suck. You know what I mean? So I think that's so key to making this thing more powerful and more usable. I use Copilot for like work. I use Copilot or AI models for work. I use AI models at home to give me ideas. It could be a therapist or other things. And I want the personalization with this, but sometimes for I think a lot of people that maybe they have a job and they switch a job and like all of this information is no longer relevant to their new thing, or maybe a new hobby or so like, how do you look at keeping data to be personalized and useful, but also like sometimes you can chuck stuff out because it's completely irrelevant to the rest of their life?
Such a deep question. It touches on a lot of things. I mean, I'm not quite sure, but I'll give you a few different frames. The obvious frame that I hear some people say is, well, you're creating data and putting it in your company, storage folder. And when you leave, your company retains ownership of that storage folder. You don't export all your PowerPoints and Excels and your code when you leave Microsoft. So one default would be each company still owns all that stuff. A separate sort of argument is, well, this isn't just about IP creation for the company. This is something that really reflects me and who I am. When I leave a company after 5 years, I've learned so much and grown and changed, and that I've been changed by that organization. In fact, my own culture and mannerisms and behavior can often have been lifted from that and be a reflection of that. So I'm leaving with something more than when I went in the normal sense. And in this sense, I've really learned to be very capable at work with my AI. And now maybe I get to take some part of that AI to my new organization, provided we can prove that it leaves behind the quote unquote, privacy IP.
Right.
Disentangling those two things blows even my brain. I think everyone's racing ahead at I think that's going to be really tough.
Okay.
And I think that will be like old school, you know, all the kind of courts will just argue it out to the death on the definitions of IP and stuff like that. That's why I've taken the view that we, like, at least for the foreseeable future, we're not even going to try and connect your consumer AI and your work AI. You can imagine, you know, all these big companies are super strict about their IP staying on their laptops and in their clouds. You know, the idea that you would bring your personal AI to work and have this like buddy that's just like plugging its brain into it just ain't gonna happen anytime soon. So I think they're very, very different worlds. Even though it's a bit forced. It might be different where your work is where it's much more blurred, right? And then many people are doing like gig work or consulting now, or where it is much, much more fluid. But I think in traditional big companies, it will be pretty fixed.
Well, so then I wonder then if in that model, you know, there's been a lot of research around, you know, the happiest people at work. And I always talk about these large language models as the best engagement tool ever, right? I mean, it can help you be more you at work. If you're talking to doctors or a lawyer, like nobody became a lawyer or a doctor because they can't wait for all the paperwork. You know what I mean? Like they are allowed now to have this kind of speed through a lot of tasks and to do what they love. And I'm wondering then if the paradigm, and I just love paradigms to kind of try to think through it, you can have a personalized AI within the work setting. I mean, so again, a lot of these sort of studies show that when you have a work best friend, that's when you're most engaged at work. And more recent studies done with Procter and Gamble and everything else, which you may have seen, I think HBS and others did this, was showing how much happier people actually are using a large language model, because it tends to be very kind and it tends to be super helpful and everything else. And also, one person working with an LLM almost replicates the work of a team in some kind of way. But you have a teammate that you can actually rely on for brainstorming, and you're stuck, or you're trying to deal with a political conversation, or you're trying to think like, how do I even approach this? So it's that aspect of it in the same way you might talk to a work best friend, right?
Right. Yeah, totally. And I see people using that both at work and at home. Is like steel manning the case, helping me sort of think through a problem, use it as a creative sounding board, and, you know, pressure test an argument where I have some, you know, biases or judgments. I see people doing that a lot.
Well, let me ask you that then. If just sort of like following on with that, one of the questions that, you know, we get a lot, and I think people are talking about a lot, is, you know, the future of work. You know what I mean? Like, how is this going to change this? I mean, in whatever paradigm we think about this in, is whether this is a second brain, or is it just an augmentation, or is it more of an automation or something like that? And that's a totally separate question about agents, which we'd love to get to as well. But do you have a sense about like the future, not in grand scale, but the future of labor, what young people should be studying? Like, you must get that question.
Look, I think, you know, it is going to fundamentally change the job.
Yeah.
You know, work is just going to look completely different. You know, especially over like 15 or 20 years, you know, 2040, 2045, if you're, you know, if you're 16 today and you're trying to decide whether or not to go to university or what to study, imagining what the world's going to be in 20 years time is, I think, very, very difficult. Whereas it was possible in the 90s to kind of conceptualize.
Like a linear sort of path, yeah.
That's right, yeah. The main skill has got to be adaptability and being flexible. Like I've always thought at school, I never learned enough how to learn. I had to learn to learn in order to keep up with the rote learning.
Right.
You know, whereas I wasn't like taught the skills of like, okay, what is the structure of this knowledge base? What do I not know? Like, how am I going to teach myself through this path? Right. And I mean, I ended up being pretty good at that, mostly because of the internet. And when, you know, when the internet came along, I was like, this is off the charts. Like, now I have complete freedom to go and independently, was driven by my own curiosity, ping people on forums and read, you know, everything that can be read about a subject that I care about. So I think being an autodidact is going to be a critical skill, and using that to explore new territories, rather than thinking, I'm going to be a professional X, I'm going to stay as an X and then continue my career path, getting promoted through that. That just is not what the world's going to look like in 2045, I don't think.
People need to become systems architects. You need to learn how to manage multiple AI tools. You're going to need to learn how to manage multiple AIs. These are kind of the skills that it goes beyond just, like a person doing the job with your tool to, like, especially when we have agents, kind of stepping back, and now you have a bunch of these and you have to figure out how to make your whole system work together. Is there any, like, I mean, at the end of the day, I think probably for everyone's career, a lot of this just had to be self-learning online and whatever it is, if you're a specialist on something. But like, do you feel like there's different paths or things or tips or that you could give to people to kind of like, how do you become a systems architect and designer and manager?
Yeah, it's a great phrase. It's a great way of thinking about it, is that we're all going to be managing teams of companions or agents that are helping us to do stuff. And so that, I think, is going to be really creative, because a lot of young people don't have the opportunity to manage until they're, you know, sort of more mature in their career. So you're going to have all these like not very experienced, you know, young, free thinking, just makers and doers. Like, in a way, it's a bit of a cheesy description of what an entrepreneur is. Like, I was an entrepreneur when I was really young. Like, I literally was selling sweets in my school at the age of 11. Illicitly for like several years. And then hiring people.
Did you make some good money doing that?
Real pocket money. Yeah, real money. Yeah. And so, like, that was just my default. I was just like, right, you know, you sell to the upper year, you sell to this class. And like, now I think people are going to be able to learn that super young, and they're going to have crazy ass ideas about what to do and be able to do them.
Yeah.
Like, the barrier to entry to execution is just about to sink.
Yeah.
You know, like, I got this framing of, we've talked about EQ, we've talked about IQ. The third component is this AQ, these actions, the actions quotient. And, you know, we're already seeing with these magical models, you know, Operator and Kua and stuff like that, that you can just spin up a VM and it's going, you know, and operating in the background and opening browsers and calling APIs. I mean, that's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't get too fixated on like learn to be a world-class programmer and stuff. I mean, it's still going to be very important, but vibe coding is already showing that, like, even if you have zero understanding of the code, you can generate the code, read it. You actually don't need any experience to actually just read through that code and be like, oh, okay, these words correspond to this long list of logic. And then with a little bit of learning, you're like, oh, okay, that's starting to give me a bit of an intuition for what a program is. And then you can iterate it and go back and forth stuff. So I think it's really just the meta skill of learning to learn rather than the expertise of being a programmer or anything else.
Love that.
This is, yeah, I think this is so interesting because it's a lot of times when we think we have to become this person, you can't just tell somebody to be intellectually curious. They have to either be that or not, but it is one of these things where we can steer people toward the right skills. And to all that, to the future looking thing, Jaden has kids, I have kids, so we're trying to figure that out. But I get asked all the time, like, where do you see this going in the next 10 years? And I was like, I don't know, maybe if I had like Mustafa Suleyman, I could ask him. So here we are, first of all. But second of all, I guess even sort of like before, you know, you have to sort of like predict where we're going to be. And it doesn't have an answer that I give, which is like, well, I guess the robot dogs are just going to, you know, just not knowing. Even in the short and medium term with agents, which is a huge part of the new rollout, do you see this more of a sort of an automation play with agents where you're just going to be able to say, hey, go to it? Or are large language models, even in the short term, too, I don't want to say unpredictable, because I think the hallucination rate is now very, very low, but it still exists. And so we still have to manage it. So do you see this as kind of like, okay, people are still going to have to manage this, or are more and more layers going to be automated until, you know?
Look, I mean, you know, I don't think it's a case of people either having intellectual curiosity or not. I think everyone dreams of ideas. It's just that most people's ideas die on the vine because of the pain of practical implementation, knowing where to start. And what I mean by reducing the barrier to entry to zero, or to something, zero is extreme, but something low, is that, like, so I listened to an interview a lot of users 2 or 3 weeks ago. This woman was using the product and she was like, I just feel unblocked. Whenever I'm stuck on what to do next, I just get unblocked. That's kind of a simplistic but very profound thing. It's like in a project, when you're trying to go from 0 to 1, every step there's a problem or an issue, or you get stuck. And so to your point about being a systems architect and managing a team of agents or people, what the art of great management is that bringing people on who help you get unstuck because they have specialized expertise. Well, now you're going to get unstuck because you're just going to be able to call on, all kinds of specialist agents and companions to help you take your vision for the future or your idea or your learning objective, whatever it is, into practical reality. So I don't see anything in the current LLM stack today which is like slows that down or is in any way a barrier. Like, I think we're in this weird world where we have technological overhang. We have more capabilities that have been invented than have been extracted from the models that we have today. If you just stopped all model development, then people kind of chipping away at mining for more use cases out of today's frontier models are still going to produce new capabilities. That's the definition of a general purpose technology. To your point about electricity, we're still mining new capabilities out of electricity because people are building new things on top of them that never existed before electricity and depend on electricity. So I think that's kind of the amazing world that we're in with general purpose technologies. There's just, you're going to keep giving more and more and more. Now it's like up to our creativity and our ingenuity to pull those use cases out.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Amazing. The last thing I wanted to ask you about is a lot of people talk about as we scale up these AI, and you kind of mentioned that we have, this is going to be a personal tool for everyone to kind of have. But a lot of people talk about the compute needed to run these, especially as it seems the models are getting bigger and more computational intensive. What does that look like in the future?
I think there's two trends happening in parallel. One is that the models are becoming more compute intensive for training and for inference, and that those scaling trends are just going to continue. But they're also becoming smaller and more efficient, and both are delivering unbelievable returns, and both actually accelerate and compound each other, because big models obviously are used to train smaller models with higher quality data. So I think what I find kind of magical is that you're not really going to think so much about the computation because latency is already, basically taken care of. On my computers today, we launched this amazing feature last week on Windows where it can read your screen in real time, talk to you about where you're stuck. Like you need to like turn on Bluetooth, or, you need to like edit a photo and you've never used Photoshop. And so it highlights the area of the screen that you should look at because it's like there's a trillion different settings. Well, what do you mean saturation, slider? And it will actually draw your mouse over to that point, your mouse point. Now, those experiences, you don't even think about computation. You don't think about latency. It's unclear even whether it's on device or in the cloud. I mean, and I think over time, we'll just get more and more immersed in those kinds of, we'll love that utility, and I think we'll worry less about whether it's in the cloud or sort of on device. I think more and more those models will be distilled and then appear locally on your phone and on your laptop and so on. It'll probably be a 2 or 3 year lag time from frontier to complete distillation on device.
Yeah, it's amazing. And we've taken a ton of your time. You've been super generous with your time, but congratulations on Copilot, on the agents of personalization, the vision, the voice. Like, this is what we've been talking about just lowering the barriers to becoming a real companion. Thank you for your work, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Cheers, guys. It was really fun. Thank you.